Namaste students, welcome to your social science history class. Today we will move on to the next chapter for the ancient civilization of the world. In this chapter, children, we will be studying about the great civilization of the world, that is the great civilization of the world, that is Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China, and we'll also be studying about the art, architecture, and lifestyle of the people. We are having many other civilizations which flourished in the various parts of the world. At the time of Indus Valley civilization, we can also see the Egyptian civilization, Mesopotamian civilization, Chinese civilization in Africa and Asia. Now let us see about the timeline, children. We see that from 3900 BC to 3500 BCE, in between this, we had the ancient Mesopotamian civilization that was in 3700 BC. In between 3500 BCE to 3100 BCE, we had the ancient Egypt civilization. From 3100 BC to 2700 BCE, in between these two, we had the ancient Indian civilization. And from 1900 to 1500 BCE, we had the ancient Chinese civilization. From 1500 to 1100, we had the ancient Israel civilization. From 1100 to 700 BCE, we had the ancient Rome civilization and also the ancient Greek civilization. In 300 BCE, we had the imperial China, and in between 100 AD and 500 AD, we had three civilizations. It was a Mayan civilization, the Japanese civilization, and the medieval Europe. So we will move on to the Egyptian civilization, children. Let us move on to the Egyptian civilization. When we move on to the civilization, children, all the civilizations whichever took place in this world, it originated on the river plains. It might be the Indus Valley civilization. It took birth on the river Sindh. And the Egyptian civilization have been originated in the river plains. The Egyptian civilization took place birth due to the presence of river Nile. The relics obtained here proclaim the grandeur of Egypt. Huge pyramids, sculptures, temples, and the inscriptions in these temples tell us a lot about Egyptian culture and history. So the early history, let us move on to the early history of the European civilization. The oldest human fossils have been found in near North Africa, but the land was very different 200,000 years ago. 10,000 years ago, North Africa was a grassland with many plants and animals. It took its current desert from around 6000 BCE. The climate began to change, which might explain why humans changed from hunting and gathering to farming. Before civilization, early humans came to the Nile River to hunt fish and gather food. But gradually, as the people learned to farm and domesticate animals and therefore live in permanent settlement areas around the Nile, became more crowded. Several towns grew and eventually kingdom developed. The change from nomadic hunter-gatherers to civilized living followed the same patterns as other places around the world. Farming provided extra food, which allowed the division of labor, which allows the development of the government and religion and creates the social classes. Starting around the 5500 BCE, two major kingdoms were developed along the river Nile. One was the Upper Egypt and another one was the Lower Egypt. Around 3200 BCE, Egypt was brought under one ruler, King Narmer, sometimes called Menes. This is recognized as the beginning of the Egyptian civilization. We know so much about the Egyptians because there are so many written resources and because the culture lasted so long with a few interpretations. Mesopotamian culture was constantly changing and disrupted by war. Another reason we know so much about Egypt is because they have made their architecture out of stone, which has been lasted for the most part. So, the now we will move on to the contributions of the Egyptians. The Egyptians children, they were expert farmers. They knew a lot of about irrigation. They built even the temples also. They invented the calendar, which has helped them to measure the time. More than anything else, they had mastered the art of writing. It was a symbolic language and it consists of small drawings and has been called as hieroglyphics. Next, we will move on to the Nile River. The Nile River played a very important role in shaping the lives of the society of ancient Egypt. This is the river Nile, children, where we are having Nile River, this line. So, the Nile River provided the ancient Egypt with the food, transportation, building materials, and more. This Nile River is the longest river in the Nile, which it is over 4,100 miles long. The Nile is located in northeast Africa and flows through many different African countries, including even the Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Burundi. There are two major tributaries that feed the Nile. One is the White Nile and another one is the Blue Nile. So every season, rainy season, the Nile River would transform the Nile Valley into a huge lake. After the valley dried up in summer, a fertile layer of clay, uh, fertile layer of clay soil would form the grazing field and the neighboring agricultural lands. The work that would need the labor of hundred of people was being done by the kind of the river all alone. The fertile land provided food for the population of the first town in the area. All agricultural regions were not in the were in the valley. Though through small canals and wells, they were responsible for the development of complex society of irrigation throughout the world. The prosperous, wealthy Egyptian peasants and citizens during the leisure engaged themselves in the creation of the artistic work. The role of the priest was created to interpret the nature and explain it. The priests were scholars and shouldered the responsibility of protecting the written documents. They also believed life after death. They believed that the man was the most powerful god of life and death. These are the god and goddesses of ancient Egypt children. So the priest considered the life on earth was temporary and needed to prepare only for the next life. So thus the whole river Nile valley was reserved for the dead. You can see Ra was a god, the blessing of wealth, healing; Osiris, justice, rebirth; Horus, protection, health, and vigor; Isis, love, magic; Thoth, wisdom, magic; Sekhmet, vanishing extremities; Anubis, underworld, protection; Bastet, fertility, protects home. All these are goddesses. Before Osiris took over the Anbias, Sithor, Thoth, god of knowledge; Hathor, Hathor, goddesses of motherhood; Sekhmet, goddess of war and healing; Bastet, goddess of warfare. So before the Osiris took over the Anubis, patrolled the afterlife. Son of Ra and Nephthys was known for mummifying the dead ones and guiding the dead soul towards the afterlife. With the head of a jackal, you can see the head of a jackal and the body of a man. Thus would be spermed with various chemicals. How did they preserve it? The dead body would be spermed with various chemicals and they wrapped it with a thin chemical with a thin cloth. The entire body was in the way preserved. The body protected, thus was called as a mummy. Sorry children. It would be kept a specially designed coffin and the grave was considered to be the true place of the Egyptians. Hence, all around the dead body, items which were needed for the daily life use and small dolls of a cook and the barber would be kept to fulfill their needs. So when I tell mummies, what do we mean by mummies? A mummy is the body of a person that has been preserved after death. Who were the mummies? They were any Egyptians who could afford to pay for the expensive process of preserving their dead bodies for the afterlife. So why did the Egyptians make these mummies? A question arises. So the Egyptians believed in the life after their death. They believed that they had to preserve their bodies so that they could use them in the after their life. So what is the afterlife when it comes? The Egyptians believed that when they died, they would make the journey to another world where they could lead a new life. They would need all the things they had used when they were alive. So their families would put those things in their graves. Egyptians paid vast amount of money to have their dead bodies properly preserved. So Egyptians who were poor were buried in the sand, and the rich ones were buried in the tomb. So what is the name of the process of the Egyptians used to prevent their bodies? This question arises if it is called as mummification. How are mummies made? We had to know it. So it took a very long time from the start to finish. It took 70 days to embalm a body. The priest in charge would wear the mask of a jackal representing the god Anubis. The body first was washed and purified, then the organs were removed, only the heart remained. The body was filled with stuffing and the body was dried up with covering with the substance called natron. This substance absorbed all the moisture of the body. After 40 to 50 days, the stuffings was removed and replaced with the linen or sawdust. The body was wrapped in the strands of linen and covered in a sheet called a shroud. The body was placed in a stone coffin called as the sarcophagus. The mummy was now ready for its journey to the after the life. So I told natron. What is natron? Natron is a natural salt composed of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate with the traces of sodium chloride and sodium sulfate and sodium sulfate. It was used by the ancient Egyptians to drive out the bodies. Why did they leave the heart of the body? A question arises. So the answer for it, the Egyptians thought that the heart was the center of intelligence and emotions. Who was the god of mummification? Anubis was the god of the mummification. He had a human body and the head of the jackal. His job was to prepare the dead bodies to be received by the Osiris. What objects did he put in the Egyptian tomb? The ancient Egyptians were buried with their belongings on the tomb walls and were painted with scenes from a dead person's life. The objects included furniture, games, even the food was placed in the tombs for the long life, our long afterlife journey. So, the next is where all these poor Egyptians were buried in the sand, and only the rich ones were buried in the tomb. So the Greek, in the beginning, the graves were created by creating the rocks in the hills. As the Egyptians moved north, they had to construct the graves in the desert itself. Tall towers were built on the graves using the huge blocks of stone in order to protect the eternal sleep of the dead. The kings and wealthy people viewed as they each other built taller and taller towers. The Greek called these structures as pyramids. The kings of Egypt were called as pharaohs. Pharaohs means a person who lives in a palatial house. The peasants who had accepted the rule of Osiris now accepted the rule of pharaohs too. This is the pyramid where you can see after the pyramids. See the funeral, the great spinac. Here is the pyramid and the funerary complex Minikun. Pyramids complex of Khafre, pyramids and funerary of the complete Khufu, where you can find the pictures here. So inside the pyramid, where I tell you, it is here. When you see here, this is the entrance, this is the descending passage, and this is the ascending passage. And here we are having the grand gallery, and this is the queen's chamber. If you come here, you are having the king's chamber. Here is the air shaft, and here is the weight relieving chambers. The limestone casing was removed, and the feet is this height. It is 480 feet, and this is 450 feet. So, in this was built during those time. We are having the Khufu, where I showed you now what is seen today. The Great Pyramid. So after an independent, prosperous life for 20 centuries, Egypt was ruled by the Arabian shepherds. For Arabian shepherd tribe called Hyksos, which attacked it, and after defeating it, it ruled for 500 years. They looted the wealth of the natives and hence did not become popular. The Jews who came wandering through the deserts in search of shelter were also hated by the people of Egypt. So, by cooperating with the foreign rule of the Jews, even assisted them in collecting the taxes and in administration. In 1700 BCE, the people of Thebes rose in revolt against the foreigners. After a prolonged conflict, they succeeded in driving away the Hyksos out of their country, and Egypt again became free. After thousands of years, it came under the rule of the Sardanapalus of Assyria. The Persian emperor by name Cambyses occupied the Egypt in 6th century BCE. The Alexander occupied Persia in the 4th century BCE. Egypt became a province of Macedonia. One of the Alexander's military general declared himself as the king of Egypt and established a dynasty of the Ptolemies. He founded the city of Alexandria. It at last came to the Romans in 39 BCE. The last Egyptian queen was Cleopatra, tried her best to save her country. It was said that the Roman feared her beauty more than her troops. It was said that the Roman feared her beauty. Twice she was successful in her attacks upon the heart of her Roman conquerors. In 330 BC, Caesar's successor, his son-in-law Augustus, did not succumb to her beauty like father-in-law but defeated her army. Though he spared her life, when he planned to carry her away along with the other spoils of the battle, Cleopatra consumed poison and ended her life. From then onwards, Egypt became the province of Rome. In the next class, children, we will move on to the next civilization, that is the Mesopotamian civilization. In the next class, we will study about the Mesopotamian civilization. Thank you, children.